Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1376. Aleph Shinayim Vov. I'm learning the power of Bina, the power, which is the Koyach HaBirer, Azeh Bina, the power to clarify, to separate, to distinguish, the power of distinction, then especially in the intellectual process of taking an idea and dissecting it and analyzing it, evaluating it, questions, answers, counter questions, until we achieve total clarity. So the clarity itself comes from the power of Chokhmah, because Chokhmah embodies and personifies, like he calls it, clarity. The etzem, borur be'etzem. But the process of clarifying, that's Bina. And there's a Yisra and Gadol we learned in this, a great contribution, or great advantage, a great addition. And that is because now it's confirming and affirming and verifying, and ratifying the truth of Chokhmah in a world, in an area where you did not have that verification. I'm reading from the bottom of page 1375. That this truth of Chokhmah should also enter a world where you did not know that, should be revealed to all, and compelling case for it. The Gam, and also that the clarification is such that it removes all waste and all excess and waste, which means every mistake possible and every falsity, so you have pure truth. Because without Bina, you can take Chokhmah, so outside of the people who understand the Chokhmah in the pure form, they can make a mistake. It can go in the wrong direction. You can come up with theories that are completely baseless, as we see many times, even in science and other places. You know certain facts, and different theories come up to try to explain it. They're not correct. So the process of Bina finds that clarity. The parentheses on top of page 1376, as we learned, he compared it to Ein Chochem Kabal Nisayin, that even though experience doesn't add any new facts, but it adds a dimension, a qualitative dimension that affirms and ratifies and brings that clarity of truth, not just to others, but also to the person himself. And he gave the example of Avram Avinu, even an Ish Neman, a completely faithful, devoted person, the test that he went through, the Nisyanis. So Nisyanis is from the word test, but it's also from the word experience. That now he said, God says, and now I know, even though God also knew before that he was a man of faith, faithful to God, but now became confirmed and revealed. And not just another, but he said also, Yashlem Gamla Atzme. Okay. The new paragraph in page 1376, summing up what we learned. So he said, this Koyach HaBirer, that's in Bina. Bina has this power. The Kudas HaChokhmah doesn't need Birer. Not only doesn't it do clarification, not only is its role not to clarify, it doesn't need clarification. It's L'mayla Me'in HaBirurim, he calls it. In other words, it doesn't enter into that domain. It's only Bina that does it. But it's B'koyach the Kudas HaChokhmah. Because in order to achieve clarity, you need to have not just the process of achieving clarity and finding it, you need to have the root core of that emes. It has to exist somewhere. In other words, like he said, like we learned earlier, that to create clarity, it needs to come. It has to come from something that is very clear on its own. If you didn't have an objective truth, then as much Bina as you'll have, you'll never reach any clarity. So there needs the Chokhmah is shining, but it's shining in a concealed way. Meaning it's shining. I shouldn't say the word shining, actually. It's there as a standard, but it's concealed, like he says. Aleph Bina, that's Aleph Bina. Chachma educates and guides Bina. But the Nekudas HaChacham B'zeh Behelam. Right. Because if it radiates in a revealed way, then you don't need clarification. It's already clear. So basically, Bina is revealing the hidden truth embedded within whatever topic or issue you're addressing. In the broader context, Bina reveals the hidden truth of the divine within existence. Yeah. That's what Bina is only coming the seichel of Chachma. He continues, not the Gili Etzema Chachma, so you don't have that resonating truth of Chachma. So that qualifies that Bina is a continuation of Chachma. Because you could ask the question, since Chachma has that clarity and Bina is only fleshing it out, so why doesn't Bina have the clarity? Because the answer is because Chachma's clarity doesn't pass on to Bina. The Riyah, or the Anocha Sichlis, that resonating truth, does not pass on. What passes on is the idea, the concept, is now being analyzed and understood and comprehended by Bina. And Bina is coming to understand, it's also to arrive at that truth. So in other words, the seichel of Chachma goes into Bina. Now you need the clarification to come to the resonating truth of it. And that's the process of Bina. And that's where the words are. I just want to read it again because I think that line, as I said, we should bottle it. Bina has the power to clarify and to crystallize. The lavan from the word lovan, like crystal clear, white, to whiten, the crystal clear. Kol dover through a very good and appropriate delving into in depth in the point of the Askola of Chachma. I'm just reading it again. And with the power of the very core chush, the sense or the faculty of seichel, lahavin ulahasik, to understand and comprehend this inyan, ulahasir memenu kol sigub selis, to understand and comprehend any subject matter, and to remove all sigub selis that can come, in other words, any mistake or any false conclusion that can fall into it. Ulahadis ulagalis as era emes, to reveal, to indicate, or to demonstrate and to reveal the light of truth. In a compelling way, make a case for it, that it should be revealed for all. And how does that work? That's through how you give isamkus yiseda be'inyan. Doesn't happen automatically. It happens through an exertion and an in-depth immersion into the subject, to the point that he adds that point, which we learned yesterday, that now through this delving, through this in-depth analysis and evaluation and discussion and debate and so on, the idea, the sichel, that began with a nekud of chachma, now through Bina, through this process, it's becoming like a new thing, like as if it's new from the outset, as I explained yesterday. Now, even though you begin with a point, but then once you start going through it, you come to new levels of understanding and clarity. Hagam shekfaru kain b'keich hachachma, even though in the power of chachma you already have that clarity, avozel behelam legamri m'keich habina, but that's completely concealed. So Bina has not discovered it, and that's why you need Bina to discover that resonating truth. In the parentheses, he added, just to qualify, there's another level called Yichud Pnimi of Chachma and Bina, where they're the Atzmus Chachma, not just the Seichel of Chachma, but the truth of Chachma radiates in Bina. But that's a higher level. Yichud Pnimi Chachma and Bina. That's not what we're discussing here. What we're discussing here is the basic process of trying to discover truth through the Bina formula or Bina process. U'b'koyach atzma. So even though it's coming from the power of Chachma behind the scenes, but in actuality, we don't know that truth until we struggle, until we exert ourselves and study the subject matter. So then, for all practical purposes, it's with your own power of the person that he draws out the sichli, brings it to light and to its truth. Like you said, also top of page Said this earlier as well. We spoke about Talmud, but I don't want to go there. I don't want to confuse matters. So this is the process of Bina. And that's, I believe, where we stopped. Yeah. We're up to the Gam Zeis, around almost a little less than 2/3 down the page. So that's a review, and it's always valuable to review these topics. As I said, it's not over yet. It's not over yet, but this is essentially the explanation of Bina. Anybody wants to ask anything?
That's what he mentioned, that there is a level of yichud, chokhmah, bina, that is becoming one entity. This is not what he's talking here, right?
Right, exactly. That's a whole higher level that comes later, or it's a deeper level that's not yichud primi. Here we're talking about the basic process. Really, it's called yichud chitzein, chokhmah, the bina. Like, just think practically, very balbatish. You hear an idea, you got the point, now you're trying to understand it. You're trying to get to really fully understand in a place where it's not clear yet. And you're clarifying and clarifying till you get to a clarity. So clearly, Bina is not on the level of Chachma. Then there's another level, which we learned earlier. If you remember, Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel, in the process of growth of a human being, first we start with feelings, emotions, behavioral emotions, reflexive emotions, impulsive emotions. Then slowly the mind begins to develop, the emotions begin to mature to the point where you have revetzes ala frechim. Bina is protecting and guiding and watching over its fledgling, over its chicks, over its children, over the midas. Then comes a stage of shalach to shalachas ha'em, where if you remember that the midas themselves have matured and they propel Bina to go higher up to Chachma. And that's where father and mother come together again. And then they istaklus on Metzach. Remember Metzach of Arechampin. They gaze at the forehead of Arechampin. That's when you start getting the higher levels of Yichud. But in the early stages of a process, we're just basically trying to understand clarity here. Understand what is emes, what is true. So that's where we're at right now, Chachma Bina. Not the Yichud Pnimi, which is already a much higher level, that joins Chachma Bina and Midas, come Midas Siklim, Mutva Murgish Muskel, if you recall, all the way to B'chal Meidecha, the highest levels where we all become fused together with Kesed, gazing at, and at the Shin Ayin Nehurin, the 370 energies, lights, all the way reaching the highest levels of Atik and higher. This we learned earlier, B'mata L'mayla. But here we're learning about the basic process of Chachma and Bina. Okay. So now we'll continue learning. We're on the line that starts with Amitose. The words V'gam Zeis, pages are ayinbeis.com. So let's go. Now remember that the ideas he's saying here have been already, I can't say it's not redundant. It's clearly adding points and elaborating on them. But there are principles here that were stated already earlier. So a principle he's going to now address is, remember, we learned on the bottom of page 1375 that in the process of Bina, it gets darker before it gets light. Meaning, before you get clarity, you first get more confusion. Like he said, he didn't use the word confusion. He said that in the process of trying to understand things, I just want to see the exact. In the middle of the process of discovery, the concealment is increased. Because while you're processing and you're asking questions and you're analyzing and arguing and debating, in that process, things are more concealed. Then the light then becomes like the light at the end of the tunnel. You start saying, you're starting to achieve a certain clarity. So he's going to address that now. He says, V'gam Zeis, back to page 1376. And V'gam Zeis, and additional point, Shebe'es HaBirur. So we're talking about now, remember the Yisra and Gadol, that which Bina contributes to the whole, to Chachma. So we explained that that's the power to clarify, to bring that clarity. That's Dafke Koyach Bina to do so. That's the power of Seichel. The human seichel is not just to receive ideas from Chachma, but also to find clarity in the idea and go through it and process it and analyze it and so on. In the process, during the birur, while you're in the process of separating and clarifying an idea, the Eira Emes, the light of truth, becomes increasingly concealed. Canal, like we mentioned, right, as I just read at the bottom of the previous page, like we discussed earlier, the biru they kushis v'stiris, the helamis shemalimim mastirim. That the process of clarification is through questions, through contradictions. The helamis means things that are not clear or covered up. Shemalimim mastirim, that conceal and cover. So when you're in a process, you ever see when you're in a process in the middle of trying to understand something and you're not clear about it yet? You're getting there, but the only way to do it is by immersing yourself into all the different questions and contradictions, and even halamas stating that at that particular point is not more clear. It makes less clear at the point. And I mentioned this, I mean, he doesn't say this explicitly, but I describe my own experiences, and I'm sure you have as well, that very often you hear an idea, so it sounds very good, then you start digging into it, you don't really understand it, you start looking more depth, and you get more confused as you go. You think you'd get clarity, but that's the process. That's always the process. I don't remember once ever writing a Farbrengen that I didn't get confused before I got clarity. I heard the Farbrengen, you heard what the Rebbe said, then came the process of researching and looking at the details and trying to put it together. I always went through a process where I really thought, how am I going to get out of this mess, so to speak? You get so overwhelmed by the details. I mean, anyone does real research, start collecting data and more data. And I remember signing, and once I thought I already got some clarity, then suddenly I found another mimer that contradicted what this mimer said. So you get more confused. But it's not a confusion, it's a process. It's a process of sifting through many details. That's what it really is, sifting. While you're sifting, it's even like even physically, when you're trying to untangle wires, or you're trying to remove the dross or the pits from fruit or vegetables. Sometimes it gets quite complicated. You can get all entangled, but then finally, what happens is you start seeing the dawn begins to break, and clarity begins to emerge. So the bottom line is that in the process, this kushish is exact words he's using, and from within this darkness, dafke, nimtza it's dafke from the dark, from the concealments, from the questions, from all these contradictions, the things that are seemingly concealing the truth, is dafke from there that you arrive at nimtza that the is derived, you arrive at, and the emerges from. And that is like mamish, a new birth, like a new child, a new birthing. This does not exist in Chachma, this process. Because Chachma, as we said, is clear from the outset. It's lamayla me birurim. It's not even subject to birurim. It's somewhat little like we learned much earlier, remember, about weekdays and Shabbos. Shabbos is no birur. I mean, there's birur echel metech echel, but at even a higher level, there's no birurim on Shabbos. Shabbos is kol malachta chasriyah. You sit and you're enjoying godliness. In the weekdays, you have to struggle with your work, with uvdin dechayel, with mundane matters. Try to find the sparks of the divine in the middle of your business, in the middle of a corrupt world. Shabbos is me'enei lamaba. Shabbos is menucha, peace. You shouldn't be struggling with any of that. Shabbos on a spiritual level is l'mayla me'berurim, like Chochmah compared to Bina. Bina is a struggle. Is trying to understand something which is not clear. So what comes out of it is atul the chadash mamish. It's similar to what he said a few lines earlier. He also said the word chidush. He said, because this processing, this sifting, this clarifying produces a new idea. But it's not a new idea. It's aligned with Chacham. It originates from Chacham. What's new about it is how you've internalized it. The clarity is new. And you feel, wow, what an idea. Chachma that point was there. Now the question you could ask is, what happens at those chacham that see it in the chachma? Yesterday we discussed, do they also need Bina? Does Bina add something to them? We'll get there. But for sure, for someone who didn't have that Nekudas HaChacham is so clear, Bina is a major chiddush, because now you found truth in a place where there was once concealment, where it was not clear. What? Yeah. Okay. So, and now he's going to give an example, but we'll get to that. We're slowly getting through it.
Possible that the Chokhmah itself does not need the Bina, because the Chokhmah itself is I don't know how to say it, is having the Bina which is in the Chokhmah.
Yeah, but you're going to see that ultimately, like Talmud Bavli has something that Talmud Yerushalmi doesn't have, and the process of Birurim does add something even in the highest levels of Moichin. So the truth is, it's going to add. You'll see. I just mentioning it because I'm setting up what's going to come, but he didn't get there yet. Right now, it's more like, because remember, he said even on top about Nisyanis and Nisayan, that it's not just revealing the truth for others, also in the person itself, there's a Izgalus. So there's going to be something that Bina does even for Chachamim, even for people. It's like, ultimately, even though a Tana can see everything in the Mishnah, there's something the Gemara enlightens that would even enlighten and bring a deeper level of understanding. But we'll get there. I don't want to jump. I'm just mentioning it that we should keep in mind this topic. But meanwhile, he said, Tul de Chadosha Mamish, Varizeh al derech moshel. He's giving an example. And this is like an example. For example, Kamayat Smicha. Very powerful, good example here. Smicha. When something sprouts, something grows. Smicha is vegetation that grows. It wouldn't grow if you try to put a seed on a table, nothing will grow. So it's coming from the koyach hatzameach in the earth. Like on the third day of creation, God said, Tache Eretz Desha, which means he implanted in earth a power of vegetation, power of growth. So there's a koyach hatzameach in the physical earth. The isavas achita, oyapri, the production of a chita, of grain, oyapri, or fruit, it comes from the power of tzemeach, the power of vegetation in the earth. Commission is barlil. Yes, we learned this earlier. If you remember, we learned about the makabel, makabel, the zacher and the keva. So I remember it was on the bottom of a page. I'll find it later. And yet, that alone is not going to make things grow. Just because there's earth and there's a keich tzemeach, kimai de hazriya v'anatiya. So we do know there are things that grow from the earth, like weeds, or some things that naturally grow without planting anything. But if you want an apple tree, a fruit, or you want grain, chita, you need to plant it. It's not growing on its own. So you need zriya and atiyah. You need sowing and planting. So it's true. If you put, like I said, an apple seed or a grain seed on a table or in the sky, it's not going to grow anything. This example is used in Chassidus. It has to be koyach, it's tafkid the ba'aretz, the koyach etzemeach. But you need something to so-called, to activate it. And that's the zriya v'natiyah, the seed that's planted. It's just like we learned earlier, a woman has the natural ability to give birth, but she needs a seed to activate the ovary, the egg, and fertilize it. So the Rebbe Rashab is going to analyze this example and come back to explain how this is Bina in comparison to Chachma. We'll see how it works. Let's continue the mashal. So here we have. So far we have two things here. Koyach HaTzemicha is Kotil says Koyach HaTzemicha in the Aretz, and that's what gives the ability for grain or fruit or anything to grow. But it's not from the Koyach HaTzemicha Levad. You need the seed. You need the planting. sowing. Achachita nizras, however, the chita that is planted, the grain of seed, the seed grain is planted. Harihum misrakiv v'nifsad legamri. It will erode and deteriorate and rot completely. I don't know if you recall, I remember as children in science experiments, they show you how a seed turns into a sapling. So the seed begins as a seed, like a seed. It looks like an apple seed or any type of seed. Once it begins to grow, the seed slowly loses its identity. It begins to shed. And there's a point where you see half seed and you even see half sapling, something beginning to grow. Then ultimately the seed will disappear altogether. So he's saying that the chita, the seed, misakiv, v'nifsed. Misakiv is like rots or deteriorates, erodes. V'nifsed is like erodes. It loses its shape and legamri completely. So it's not like if you took a seed, for example, and you just planted it and the seed just began to expand. I'm just hypothetical. It's not the way it works. Okay, so the seed was just small, now it's expanding, and it finally turns into a full grain, a full, what do we call a full stalk of grain? Or an apple tree, or a different fruit tree. But that's not what happens. The seed loses itself in the process. The seed gets absorbed in the ground. And that's the catalyst that causes this thing to grow from the power of growth in the earth. So you have two things happening here. You have the earth, you have the seed. The seed erodes and deteriorates in the ground, and that causes it to grow. That's like ma'ayin liyesh, because it's not the seed expanded, the seed disappeared. So it's like the seed had to become ayin before the next level of yesh grows. So the seed has to deteriorate and erode in order to create. Mamish like a new thing. What does he mean by new? He doesn't mean new as if there's no seed. Because without a seed, it wouldn't grow. It means when you look at the seed and you wouldn't know better, and suddenly you see an apple tree, you'd say, I don't see a connection between these two. It doesn't seem at all. Or take even in the birth of a child. You see the birth of a child after 9 months. It's almost impossible to imagine how that emerged from a seed that fertilized an egg. Besides how tiny it was, just completely not the same reality. A human being with all our complexities, all coming from that place. So Chassidus explains not here that even though it's not yesh ma'ayin like creation itself, because yesh ma'ayin, the way God created the world, there wasn't even a seed. God said, I want existence. Yes, there are higher levels that God said. First, there's the 10 hidden spheres, and so on. But there's a point where ayin mamish, something completely non-existent, became existence. In our case, there's at least a seed. But for all practical purposes, it's not yesh miyesh. As in, I take, let's say, an object, a piece of clay, and I turn it into a pot. Or I take some other elements and turn it into some other object. There, it's yesh miyesh. You're reshaping something. Here, there's a yesh ma'ayin aspect of ischatshus mamish because it's going through such a metamorphosis. And this is true with any nature, and it's not just human. This is, like he said, even in vegetation and also in the animal world and so on. Okay. But how does that apply to what? He's still not finished with the muscle. He'll have to get back to Bina. So he says, like, now comes the next point. And that's why the growth is b'teisvis v'ribi mo'ed. It's abundant and in great number. It multiplies. Because it's ma'ayin liyesh. Now what he means by this is you plant a few seeds or many seeds, and the growth, we call the growth is plentiful. Compared to the seeds, you have an abundant produce, when the harvest is good, that explodes, essentially. Now, I'm not sure whether he's saying, well, here he doesn't elaborate, but in some places when you talk about this, it's like you look at a garden and then you come and you plant seeds in the garden. So in the beginning, you don't imagine what's going to come next. You come a few months later and everything was tended to properly and watered and nurtured. The garden is now a blooming, beautiful garden. Someone who was there when you just planted the seeds would never have imagined it as such. So what he means is that even though the seeds are without that, it wouldn't have grown, but the abundance that emerges is not just a yesh miyesh. It's not just, okay, you have a bunch, let's say 1,000 seeds, so now you have 1,000 plants. It's true, they all came from seeds, but their growth grows in this abundant way. In other words, the blossom, and when it blossoms, and so on, it's in a form, like he says, but tesus v'ribi ma'od. You could also say one apple seed produces a tree that has many apples and many, many more seeds. One seed can produce much more than what it itself contains, in addition to what I just said, which may be really the kavanah here. But regardless, because it's yesh ma'ayin, so like it has that explosive, that exponential development or blossoming. All this is going to be relevant to Bina, as we'll see. Okay. U'kamoshn is boiled be'in helen v'gili v'yesh ma'ayin. Yeah, the Rebbe Rashab is definitely the Commission is Bar Leil. This is the third time on this page. He referred to something we discussed earlier, which goes back hundreds of pages, literally. The Commission is Bar Leil about Aleph Bina. That's literally in volume 1. It's also in volume 1. And now this Commission is Bar Leil is the beginning of volume 2. If you remember there, he spoke about 4 different relationships. Kilia Helam, Yesh Ma'ayin, Koyach and Poil, and Etzem and Eir. And then he added another one, Hiyuli and Poil. So in that discussion, he discussed the difference between Gilia Helam and Yesh Ma'ayin. Gilia Helam means it's concealed and you reveal it. When you reveal something that was concealed, it's not going to multiply. You're just going to see it. Now that before you didn't see it, now you see it. So that's what he's referring to. He says, "In Helen v'Gili yesh ma'ayin, the Helen v'Gili are Gili ba b'hagbola." Why? Because there's no metamorphosis, there's no quantum leap and paradigm shift. You're not going from a seed that's deteriorating into a tree or into a stalk. You're revealing the concealed. So there it's b'hagbola l'fi eif nahelam. It's commensurate to what was concealed. So if I'm, let's say, holding in my hand right now a bunch of coins, and then I open my hands, it's not going to multiply in any exponential way. It's going to be exactly what I had in my hand concealed, is now revealed. The same thing is on deeper levels. When you reveal something that's more concealed, it's more like, sometimes the special, like the difference between bracha and tefillah. So Chassidus explains, when you give someone a bracha, you're revealing what belongs to them. In other words, the bracha, they were destined to get this blessing. Your bracha opened up the door that they should actually get it. Tefillah is Yehi Ratzon, can create something new. That's why it says that when Yosef placed Ephraim and Menashe before Yaakov crossed his hands because he saw, even though he put Menashe to the right and Ephraim to the left because Menashe was older, so he crossed his hands because he saw that Ephraim's bracha is going to be a greater bracha. So he put his right hand on top of Ephraim. Why couldn't he bless Menashe with that blessing? Because that blessing was not destined for him. It's like already the package has already been destined for the person. We need now to deliver it. That's Gilead Hela. When you mispal tefillah, it says, can draw something new. A person could be, God forbid, destined to not make it. They're in a hospital sick. You daven, and you ask God to change destiny. So it's a Ratzon Chodesh, it's called. And then Birchas Kohanim is an example of bracha and tefillah come together. But I'll just give you an example of Gilead Helam. So Gilead Helam is L'fe'efan Helam. That's why it's Bagbola. V'yesh ma'ayin, we learned back then, Bo b'bchin ligvul, ad ein shir. That comes in an infinite flow without any limit. Why? Because it's not based on, in Gilead Helam, the Gilead is only an outgrowth of the Helam. But anything that's a yesh ma'ayin that goes through that paradigm shift from a state of ayin to a state of yesh has the capacity to explode into something far greater than the original. So it's not just revealing, you're actually creating many new elements. In this case, the produce that, like I said, one seed can produce hundreds of seeds. Aden Shir, and the truth, why is it Aden Shir? Because the seeds planted in Gan Eden are still producing trees till this very day. So, like he says, Eitz Pri. So you have the idea that that you have, each one perpetuates the human race. The human race continues on. So it has an element of Blikvul. Chassidus explains what that means at length, but the bottom line, doesn't have any limit, unless God or something intervenes. But on its own has the perpetual power because it's a form of Yesh Ma'ayin. Okay. And so too is it with the giving birth of something. Till now he's talking about smicha. It's also a birthing. But he's talking about the world of tzemeach. Now he's going to the world of a life. Not necessarily a human, or it could be even an animal. But bottom line is Heloda. The ima yesh the koyach Heloda. Even though the power of birthing, v'chol tzir avlad, and the entire structure of a fetus, of a child, who betipas atchar, it's all included in the drop, in the male drop, the seed of the semen. Who commission is barely ill, like we learned earlier, that's like a seed. Shu b'chinas mashpia be'etzem, because the dchar, zocher, is mashpia be'etzem, and that mashpia, he produced a seed that in the concentrated form, like a seed of a tree, has the whole tree within it. But kol mokem, nevertheless, that's not enough. That's still like in the seed state. Nevertheless, the very process of giving birth, that should actually be the existence of a child, it's with the power of the feminine power, the female. Because a male seed without a woman, besides the fact that you need the egg, but also without the power of the woman and her womb, and the seed as a place to fertilize the egg and develop, you're not going to have a child. No man can give birth just with a seed. Just as we said before, a seed without earth is not going to give birth to anything. You put a seed on a table, or like in the sky, it doesn't give birth. You need the koyach etzemeach sheba'aretz. On the other hand, you need the seed to be planted in the earth and to fertilize it. And then it grows in that form, like he said, that the seed deteriorates, yesh ma'ayin, and it grows into the produce in the number of yesh ma'ayin of abundance that we've been learning. So the same thing is here in Heloda, that even though the seed has the power of life in it, but you have to have the process of Heloda is through Mitzvah al-B'cher Chanuk v'Dafka. Im hi eina ruya lo helid, and if the woman, if the feminine is not ruya, meaning she's not capable of giving birth for whatever reason, eina mekabelas tipas atchar, she will not absorb the tipas atchar, the drop of the seed. There'll be no birthing. That's why the seed can be completely intact. But if a woman, God forbid, I mean, he's talking here, as I said, not necessarily only humans, but whatever reason, is not capable of giving birth, it will not give birth. But on the other hand, just as it is with the Kreich Atzmicha, Achanukva, Ein lo Kreich Alod, Rak Laidei Tipas Atchar. On the other hand, the woman without the seed will also not have the actual leikach halada. Will actually also not give birth. Well, here he's speaking even more. That we learned this earlier. We discussed this at length. The koach halada doesn't just give her the seed, or it also activates the power to give birth. That this seed, the male seed, it stimulates and arouses and gives and awakens within her the power to give birth, like the seed in the ground that activates the power of birthing in the earth to sprout into some growth. So he clearly says it's ma'ira the koach halada. Ma'ira means it stimulates and awakens it, and also nesen ba, it transfers into it, which is stronger even. That like it inserts the power of birth within the female. I believe we discussed this earlier. I don't know scientifically if that's how it's understood today, but it's possible. Who knows? I'm not sure of the details here, but I have to go back to what we learned. It's a while back. We learned this whole subject when we speak about the Eram Makabel. I'll show you where it was. Quite far back. Not well in this volume, not very far. Yeah, bottom of page 1352 is where this was discussed. Talks about the moon, the moonlight, the Makabel. Now comes another point in this example. And then he's going to bring it back to, hopefully we'll understand the same with Bina, yeah. Omnom, okay, so what we have here, the seed, the male seed, we have the female power of birth, they both need each other. But now comes another point to make. The actual process, omnom, mitzias avlad, the very being, the very body of the child, who metipas hanukva, is from the tipa, from the seed. Well, tipas hanukva means from the, we say tipas hanukva means maya nukvin. Essentially, it's from what's generated by the female. Ukmei oida mina aim. Like the Gemara says in Ida, that which is in the child that was red, the blood. So the mother must have a gidim. From there
You're
comes
breaking
the
up on
flesh.
us.
And
Can you go back 5 seconds? You broke up on us.
Yeah. So the very being of the child comes from the mother's processes. Like the Gemara says, mina oidam mina aim. Gemara says that the bones and the white of the eyes, another white comes from the seed of the man, but the blood and the flesh, like he says, shemamenu basar v'gidim. The oidam, from there comes the flesh, and the gidim are the veins, the arteries, the nerves sometimes, comes from the mother. The gam kol isavos avlad. And additionally, the entire creation of the child, umitziyuse, and his being, his very being, shenitztayer b'tziyotev, that he's shaped and formed in a healthy and a proper, a symmetrical way, hakol b'keich hanukva dafke mitzad atzma. All that comes, page 1377, top of the page. That all comes from the power of the mother. So though the seed was necessary, because without the seed, you're not going to have any birth. But after that, like he said, the woman has to have the power has to be able to give birth, has to have the etzem eloda, is b'koyach hanukva. So even though it's stimulated and it's drawn from the power of the seed of the male, but the etzem eloda is from the woman, and the very child's existence, being, is also from the woman. And all the creation, the whole shaping of the child, all developed in the mother's womb. B'tzad atzma, without the male support for that. The seed began the process, but the development throughout is the mother alone, even if the father is not there. Ukamaymer bini yaseda nitna be'isha. So even though Bina yaseda nitna be'isha is talking about Bina, that she has an additional element of understanding, and we'll soon understand how that fits with everything we're discussing, Bina, but here he's using it in the context of that Bina said that she has a Bina, level of Bina of the birthing, that Chochmah that comes from the father is not there. And even though, like we said, within the seed, there's already the existence of the child in a very concentrated, obviously, form and a shape. Just like in an apple tree, the seed has everything contained in it, but it's not developed. How do you do it? The tipas atcha nisrach v'nifsad. Like we spoke before about the seed. What will happen with the actual seed? With the actual semen that fertilizes the egg, what happens with the actual seed? Nisrach v'nifsad. It gets wasted and erodes, disappears. Doesn't remain. Just like the seed in the ground, that will turn into whatever it grows into. But the seed itself will no longer be there. Same thing, the tipas atcha nisrach. Nisrach literally means a foul odor, but it basically gets spoiled. It gets spoiled and nifsad and disappear and lost and disappears.
I have the question.
Well, a second, let me finish the reading the whole piece here. And the actual process that shapes and creates the child is the power of the female. So the male seed, like in the seed that you plant in the ground, was the catalyst. It's necessary, got everything going, but then the seed, so-called, recedes. And now the process continues within the woman as the child develops and grows. And this child will be like a new existence. You won't be able to identify it's nothing common with the seed, just like the apple tree or the stalk of grain or wheat that grew from the seed, but now it's like a whole new reality. The child is a whole new entity. So let me finish, then I'll take questions. Now he goes back and finishes and says, this is the same with Bina and Chochmah, which remember are compared to Abba and Ima. Chochmah is the father, Bina is the mother. Just as we discussed now in growth and in birthing, same as with on an intellectual level, the sichli of Bina. Though it comes from the seed of the point of Chochmah, the process of clarification and the development of the idea that comes through Bina is dafka from the power of Bina on its own. Like you said before, it comes like something new. So it originated with that seed, but then the Bina process created like a new idea. All originated the same idea, because remember, the child is going to be the child of the father too. And not only two, the father's major contribution, but its existence is like a new entity. Like he said with smicha, the one seed multiplies unlimited ways. Same thing with Bina. The idea now comes into many details. Now he says it explicitly. And new things are innovated that were not there in the Nekudas HaChochmah. Ukamoi b'Moshe diksiv, the ekach, when Moshe writes, says in Dvarim, Chachamim v'yaduim, v'elu nevenim, afili b'meisha lo yishtakach, the maven dover metech dover, u'bekeich habina davke. So it says, when Moshe v'ekach, and I collect, Moshe is saying, and I gathered together Chachamim. Those who are Chachamim is Chachma. V'yaduim are those that have das. Ve'elu nevenim. Nevenim is Bina. Afili b'meisha le'ishtakach. That even the Meisha was not existent.
Moshe was looking for nevoinim, but he couldn't find. He was looking for Chachamim, nevoinim, v'yaduim, and it said he found Chachamim v'yaduim, but nevoinim afili b'meisha le'ishtakach.
Right. Even Moshe couldn't find. Why? Because Bina has something that Chachma doesn't have. The maven dover meter dover b'keich habina dafka. So the idea of one idea giving birth to another idea is dafka from Bina, not from Chachma. Like the seed that gives birth to many things, that you need Bina for. Like the feminine or the earth that makes it grow into a multitude. So we see from here what Bina adds to Chachma. We're going to obviously understand this a lot better as he explains it with Teresh B'Ksav and Teresh B'Al Peh. But this is, in essence, what we've learned. And we'll go over it again, more detail tomorrow. But I'll stop here, both learning, stopping, and also for any questions.
Before you ask whether it's contradictory to science, we all know it is. But 150, was he looking for a mushal based on the state of science 150 years ago, or because I understand that I understand the nimshal more than the mushal. The mushal doesn't make any sense to what we know now. So how did was he just looking for existing science to make this mushal, or is it has a Torah basis? What he says, early Torah basis.
I mean, it's like everything in Chassidus and Torah. They bring many natural phenomena and describe it. Sometimes it's very, very consistent and easy to understand in scientific context. Sometimes it needs some explanation. We've gone over some things. Chassidus is not looking into science. Chassidus is not a science book. Chassidus is Divrei Elikim Chaim. It's part of Torah, and it's bringing examples of the way God created the world. Now the question is, sometimes you find something in Chassidus that, like we talk about the four elements: fire, water, wind, and earth. So today we know we don't really use four elements anymore. It was more of a Greek idea for many years ago. Yet Torah brings it. So the Rebbe has letters that explain the four elements are still four archetypes. So it's all about first understanding Chassidus and Kabbalah, Chassidus, Torah in general, Chazal. There are many things in Chazal that are not necessarily consistent the way it is in modern science. So some people come to reconcile. Some things say things have changed. I was just wondering what he's saying here about Tchar and Nukva is, if a scientist, someone who really knows the process, how we understand today the process of conception and male female, the interaction of the egg being fertilized by the seed, is this exactly the way it is? That's all I was wondering. Because here he does say that, excuse me, that it triggers. That's clear. Obviously, you don't have the seed, you're not getting any type of conception. But he says, not just does it trigger, he says, Ma'ir is triggering, like activating, stimulating. But it sounds like almost like without the seed, the woman would not have the power to give birth even. So like it not just activates it transfers the power of birthing in a way like what the seed does in the earth. The earth has the power to give, but remember, the earth also produces plants and grass and weeds on its own without any seeds. Is that because there are natural seeds in the earth, or because the earth just has that power? So that's
there's a thing called parthenogenesis, where certain animals can give birth, like a rabbit is known to do that, but without a sperm donor.
Or an amoeba. An amoeba has that.
Certainly a mammal like a rabbit.
A rabbit does not need a male counterpart to give birth?
I mean, usually it does, and usually in nature it does, but it can, if it has the right stimulation, and maybe it's only when it's artificially applied, but no seed at all, and it's able to do it. They've done experiments.
Okay, so this is part of, okay, look, Chassidus is not coming to understand the science of it. Interesting for me, if someone knows the science, is what says here consistent with how people understand it. And even if not, it's fine. Listen, that scientists don't have a monopoly on it also. They also have theories. And
yeah, well, we know the main thing is the DNA, haploid amount of half the DNA given by the father and half the DNA by the mother, and that's the main thing to make the characteristics of the child. So, I mean, that's why I was asking whether he was just looking for a muscle in the current science of the day, and that's not important. It's not brought down by the Gemara or Mishnayos that this is what happens. I don't think.
When you read chapter 2 in Tanya, and he speaks about that the child is included in the tipus moyach ha'av, the ben, the child is like originates from the semen, from the drop of seed of the man and father, and even though you need the mother, but there he doesn't refer to the egg, the ovary of the mother. So many people ask the question, what does that mean? Is the mother just like an oven, so to speak, lahavdil? That just like where you put the challah to bake, and it's just a processor? But the mother also contributes, like we know the Gemara, like he just said, the mother contributes to the DNA chromosomes of the child. Besides just carrying the child, the mother also has features and the personality of the mother. So it's not just the seed of the father that provides the personality and DNA of the child. It's also the egg and the ovary of the mother, which carries her DNA and her personality. So that is not so focused upon like in Tanya or other places. But when I taught it and when I teach it, I don't think the Alter Rebbe is negating that. He just wants to explain that, like Bonim Atam Hashem Elokechem, since we're called children, sons of God, that as children we have, and God here is compared to Av as Chachma. We also have Chachma. Not negating that we also have from the Bina part. There he wants to explain that it's coming from the highest levels of Chachma, of godliness. But I'm just pointing out that, again, when you're learning Chassidus doesn't come to thoroughly explain it from a scientific point of view. Chassidus is using nature and using examples to try to understand the idea. Anyway, that's what. If someone wants to look into this in detail, he does say here these words. Then he says, and this that's what I was jumping on, the nation ba. What does that mean? That he instills in her the power of birth. But we know that's not necessarily the case. The power of birth is in the woman. Now he's saying that as well here. So I think it's a form of stimulating, or maybe it activates it. I'm not sure exactly the exact explanation. It needs a little more looking into. And I referred to what page did I say before? The bottom of page, 1352. I want to look back. I'll go back there as well. Any other questions, my friends? Okay. So we'll stop here. End of the paragraph on top of page 1377. And we'll continue tomorrow.